Before I get started, fair warning, this video will contain spoilers for Season 2 of Star Trek Prodigy, so if you haven't watched it yet, you might want to bookmark this video and come back and watch it later. The second season of Star Trek Prodigy dropped on Netflix a couple of weeks ago. I binged it all the first day and put up kind of a quick and dirty, low-effort review video sharing my off-the-cuff thoughts on it. The short version is, it's great, I liked it a lot, but I've been thinking about it since then, and in particular, I've been pondering a question I asked myself as I was watching it, a question I repeated in my review video, and that question is, how can this cartoon show made for children be so much better than most of the live-action Star Trek that's been produced in this current era of the franchise? Well, like I said, I've been pondering it, and I believe I have the answer, or at least I have an answer, and it's this. Prodigy treats its target audience of children like adults, rather than treating its target audience of adults like children. I want to explore two ways in which the show does this, and the first of those is the way in which Prodigy handles legacy characters, cameos, references to other Star Trek shows, story elements which we collectively label fan service. Prodigy makes use of legacy characters, more of them in Season 2 than in Season 1, and refers to events from other Star Trek shows, some of which directly affect the events of the series, some of which don't, and I usually hate that. I see it and I roll my eyes and I feel whatever interest I had in the thing I'm watching just begin to nosedive, but Prodigy gets away with it, mostly. How? Why? What is Prodigy doing that is so different from what other recent Star Trek shows have done? As it happens, there is a perfect example of this in Season 2 of Star Trek Prodigy. Perfect not just because it is a very well-executed use of a legacy character, but because it allows us to draw a direct contrast between how another recent Star Trek series used a legacy character in a far less satisfying way. How direct? It's the same legacy character. This guy. Wesley Crusher. Wesley shows up about halfway through Season 2 of Prodigy and plays an important supporting role from that point on, appearing in a total of 8 episodes, though he's really only a major factor in 6. Wesley arrives to aid the main characters in resolving a time travel paradox which, left unaddressed, will eventually cause the destruction of their entire timeline. As he explains to the young protagonists, he is a traveler through time and space, part of a group who have assumed the responsibility of guiding and protecting the integrity of the many different timelines that make up the multiverse of existence. He can travel between dimensions with relative ease and even knows what's going to happen in the future, usually. He has a personality that matches his job and his role in the story and enables him to bounce off of the other characters in dramatic and comedic ways. Wesley, as we see him in Prodigy, is a little manic, a little frazzled, a little bit all over the place, which makes sense given that he perceives reality the way he does. He's well-intentioned, but reckless. He knows lots of things, but he occasionally has trouble keeping things straight. Like the other adult characters in the show, he's a mentor for the young protagonists, but he doesn't always seem like an entirely reliable one, at least not in the moment. His presence in the story is dynamic. He enters as the solution to a mystery subplot threaded through the first half of the season. From there, he's initially helpful to the efforts of the heroes, then unintentionally threatening to them, then helpful again, but in a different way. He's captured by the villains at one point, which turns out to be part of his plan, but he's injured and temporarily loses his space-time-related superpowers as a result. He plays an important role in the larger plot of the season and in the arcs of the characters, and also has an arc of his own. He is a legacy character, someone longtime Trekkies will remember, maybe fondly, maybe not, from Star Trek The Next Generation, but more importantly, he is a character on this show, with a meaningful role in the story. Compare how Wesley is used in Season 2 of Prodigy to how he is used in Season 2 of Star Trek Picard. It's the final episode of the season. Kor, the genetically engineered daughter of Adam Sung, who is himself an ancestor of Noonien Sung, the cyberneticist who creates data in TNG, yada yada yada. Kor gets a message to show up at a particular place and time, and she does, and up walks Wesley looking like Will Wheaton. Some of you might say, well, of course he looks like Will Wheaton. He's played by Will Wheaton. That's literally Will Wheaton standing there. Right. That's my point. When I watch Wesley's appearance in season 2 of Picard, I'm not thinking, oh, hey, there's Wesley. I'm thinking, oh, look, it's Will Wheaton. He's just this grinning doofus wearing nondescript clothes. There's no look to the character. I'm not saying he needed to be wearing like a uniform or anything, but compare him there to Wesley from Prodigy. He's got a leather jacket. He's got a sweater. It's not exactly revolutionary costume design, but it reads like some thought was put into it. It's a look. He looks like somebody, not somebody who heard they were filming an episode in the park and dropped by on his lunch break to say hi. It's not just the appearance of the character in Picard, it's the performance. Wheaton delivers his lines like he's meeting a fan at an autograph signing, or having a friendly chat with a fellow Star Trek actor in his capacity as host of the Ready Room. It doesn't feel like a performance. Which is not a knock on Will Wheaton. He's a capable actor. The reason he doesn't feel like he's playing a character in Star Trek Picard is because the creators of that show didn't give him a character to play. There's nothing meaningful for Wesley to do. There's no reason for Wesley to be there. There's no reason why this character talking to Kor should even be Wesley. He's only there to write her character out of the show. He shows up in the last episode of the season with no build-up. His name hasn't even been mentioned the entire season. He walks up to Kor, a character who has no idea who he is, and says, hey, I'm a traveler. We traverse time and space to safeguard the tapestry of history. Sound like fun? Want to be a traveler? And Kor's like, okay. And they leave together, and that's it. Is there anything about Kor's character to suggest she would make a good traveler, or that this ending makes sense for her? No. Is there any particular reason why her character needed to be specifically written off the show at all? No. Wesley's appearance and the entire scene is completely pointless. It's just an excuse to have a familiar face show up and wave to the audience. In Prodigy, Wesley has a discernible character, which enables Will Wheaton to give a performance, and it's an excellent one. The character has a purpose. He fits into the story. His name isn't mentioned before he shows up, but his sudden arrival doesn't feel arbitrary because it's the answer to a question that's been posed throughout the season to this point. Someone is communicating with our heroes, guiding them, giving them hints on what they should do next to accomplish their goals. Who is it? They think it might be Chakotay, who they're already looking for, but it turns out to be Wesley. He doesn't just show up out of nowhere. It's a satisfying reveal that resolves something while simultaneously driving the plot forward. Like Kor, the main protagonists of Prodigy have no idea who Wesley is. Most of them. Rock knows who Wesley is, which makes sense given that she has become the star student of the group and thrown herself into her studies as a prospective Starfleet cadet. But unlike Kor, there's a reason why Wesley would want to help them specifically. They aren't just random kids hanging out in a park. They're central figures in a time travel paradox, and that's the sort of thing Wesley, as a traveler, is supposed to take care of. There are story threads connecting these characters, drawing them together so that their interactions feel organic rather than contrived. They are contrived. They're characters in a story somebody made up doing the things they were made up to do, but they feel organic when you watch the show. That's what good writing does. Wesley is not the only legacy character to appear in Prodigy by a long shot. I focused on him because he provides the opportunity for such a direct comparison with an inferior use of a legacy character, but there are legacy characters all over the show in Season 2. 3 imports from Star Trek Voyager play important roles. Catherine Janeway, in flesh and blood and holographic form, returns after having been a main character in Season 1. The Doctor, whose presence is probably the least justified, but has enough worthwhile stuff to do that the show gets away with it, and Chakotay, who winds up being one of the highlights of the season. There are others, mostly in what amount to cameo appearances. They aren't used as well as Wesley or Janeway or Chakotay. They aren't as necessary or as meaningful to the story, but none of them feel like they're just showing up to provide sentimental Trekkies in the audience with a cheap nostalgia fix. How does that translate to the show treating its audience like adults rather than children? The best way I can think of to explain it is with these. When Star Trek Picard or Star Trek Lower Decks, they aren't the only shows in the franchise that do this, to be fair, but they're far and away the most prolific offenders. When they feature a legacy character, most of the time, it feels like they're jingling their keys in our faces as though we're babies, and they're trying to hold our attention. Look, look, look! Who's that? Is that Wesley? You know Wesley! Watch this, watch this! Oh, who is it now? It's Sonia Gomez. I knew you'd be excited to see her for some reason. Watch, who is it now? Keep looking. It's the Moriarty hologram. Watch, look who it is. It's Nick Locarno. Look, it's the character you remember from that one episode. Yes, it is. On the other hand, when the creators of Star Trek Prodigy feature a legacy character, they show me the keys, and when I first see them, I roll my eyes and think, okay, here we go. But instead of shaking them in my face like I'm a goddamn infant, they say, come on, let's see what's behind the doors these keys unlock. The second way which Star Trek Prodigy treats its audience like adults that I want to examine is the depth and emotional complexity and maturity of its storytelling. The characters of Prodigy go through significant and at times extremely heavy emotional arcs in Season 2, and even though the show is targeted at young people, it doesn't shy away from some very difficult subjects. Dal, essentially the lead character of the main ensemble, has to deal with some pretty serious shit this season. He's always thought of himself as the de facto captain of their group, insisted on it, in fact. But as the season goes on, he begins to realize that maybe he isn't meant for that role. He has trouble accepting that. He needs to figure out who he is and where he fits in. His confidence and brashness start to buckle, revealing uncertainty and insecurity underneath. And compared to some of his friends, Dal gets off easy. Gwyn, the second lead, gets caught up in the time paradox plot and spends most of the season in a state of uncertain existence. History is altered in a way that would prevent Gwyn from ever having been born, and if the paradox isn't resolved, eventually she'll just vanish. There's an armband she wears, a little technobabble gadget that's supposed to keep her stable in this timeline, at least for a little while, that is a constant source of anxiety for her and for her friends. And for us. Plus, she's worried about what's going to happen to her home planet, which in one possible future is fated to fall to civil war and become an enemy of the Federation. It's not exactly standard fodder for a what I did on my summer vacation essay, you know? Of the members of the main ensemble, the one with the most harrowing and impactful arc is Zero, because they are of a non-corporeal species that cannot be directly viewed by others lest those others go mad. It's a Star Trek thing. Zero exists in a mechanical isolation suit that allows them to interact physically with the environment and shields other people from their full appearance, which seems to really cut down on the insanity, but because they are non-corporeal and stuck in an isolation suit most of the time, Zero doesn't know what it's like to experience physical touch. This leaves them feeling cut off from the world even when they're in the thick of the action and surrounded by friends they love and who love them back. Then, near the end of the first half of the season, the gang visits a planet that is home to a colony of non-corporeal entities like Zero, who have devised a way of constructing physical bodies for themselves, bodies which enable them to interact fully with the world around them, to have the sensory experiences they weren't able to have as disembodied beings. Zero undergoes the procedure, emerges with a new physical body, but then learns the catch. Their new body can only exist on this planet, which has special properties which keep it intact. If Zero leaves the planet, their body will begin to degrade and will eventually become unusable. Of course, Zero chooses to leave the planet and go with their friends to continue their mission to fix the time paradox, but for the rest of the season, the deterioration of their physical body is something Zero has to deal with. As if introducing a character arc that is a thinly veiled metaphor for aging and death wasn't heavy enough for a kid's show already, Zero ultimately chooses to sacrifice their already injured and withering body in order to save their crewmates, entering a zone that has been affected by a weapon that causes rapid aging and directing it away from the ship. By the time the job is finished, Zero's body has experienced the symptoms of extremely advanced aging and essentially undergone physical death. Zero survives. They're transferred into a new containment suit with upgraded sensory inputs, allowing them to still experience physical touch, so it all turns out okay in the end, but the journey there is emotionally fraught, and I'm saying that having watched it at age 44, well outside the target demographic. It's not just Dal, Gwyn, and Zero. It's not just the main ensemble. Chakotay, one of the legacy characters who ends up playing an important supporting role, has a character arc that goes to some pretty grim places. When we first meet him this season, he is lost in more ways than one. The original captain of the time-displaced Starfleet vessel, the USS Protostar, that was the hero ship of Season 1 and which plays a central role in the time paradox plot of Season 2, Chakotay has lived for 10 years in the wreck of the Protostar. Displaced in time, crashed on an unknown planet, for most of that time with only the ship's Janeway hologram to keep him company. Most of the Protostar's crew was lost after the ship was captured by the Val Nakat, the species of Gwyn, as well as the primary antagonists of Seasons 1 and 2. Only Chakotay and his first officer, Adrik, survived as prisoners of the Val Nakat. They managed to escape and steal back the Protostar, flying it through a time anomaly and winding up somewhere in the past, stranded on a remote and hostile planet. The ship is grounded, but Adrik thinks they can get it to fly again by harvesting antimatter from the powerful ion storms that regularly sweep across the planet, and using that antimatter to recharge the warp core. Chakotay is skeptical, but Adrik is sure it will work and goes off on his own to test his theory, and never comes back. Dal and the other main characters locate this planet eventually and find Chakotay bitter and resigned. One day, after being caught out in one of the storms and getting a bit lost, Dal happens upon Adrik's body, and we see Adrik's remains, his picked clean skeleton. Chakotay arrives, having come to Dal's rescue, and sees the body of his friend. But he also sees something else. Adrik is still clutching a canister of antimatter, captured from the storms. He died in the effort, but Adrik proved his theory. It is possible to use the storms to recharge the Protostar and escape the planet. Adrik is given a solemn, proper burial at sea, and then the gang gets to work carrying out his plan to fix the ship. The discovery of Adrik's body is the most stunning occurrence in the second season, perhaps the entire series to this point. Not only is it a grim visual, particularly for a kid's show, his bones are right there in plain sight in the full light of day, no insinuating shadows, no out-of-focus image in the extreme foreground for the others to react to. There he is. The emotional reactions of the characters when they see Adrik are raw and uncompromisingly portrayed, and complicated. Chakotay is overcome with grief upon first seeing Adrik, but the discovery also brings with it a kind of relief. There's closure now, at least. His friend is no longer missing. Chakotay can stop wondering what happened. There are also some positive feelings, pride and validation in the fact that Adrik's plan for collecting antimatter from the storms is valid and workable, optimism and excitement about their prospects of getting off of the planet. This is a lot. There are some big, deep, complex emotions at play here. Shock, sadness, grief, and hope all mixed together. And that's just one example from one episode. Throughout the season's 20 episodes, the young heroes of the series confront dangerous threats, deal with trauma and loss and death. Characters die or seem like they might die. The creators of Prodigy don't shy away from it, don't soften it, don't sugarcoat it. They trust that their viewers will be able to handle it. They treat the audience with respect. I cannot tell you how much I admire that, and how much I wish all other storytellers, regardless of medium or intended audience, did the same. On balance, Prodigy is not a remotely grim or dark or depressing series. It's an entertaining adventure show about a group of kids basically saving the universe. But along the way, the story does go to some dark places, and when bad things happen, they're presented unflinchingly and given weight and shown to have consequences. Whether the protagonists are having fun or staring down their own mortality, the creators of Prodigy take their characters and their story seriously. That's why they make the choices they do in telling that story, and that's why those choices work, including the fan service-y bits I discussed earlier. Prodigy features a bunch of legacy characters, it brings in tropes from across the franchise like Cetacean Ops and the Mirror Universe, and it almost never feels like it's pandering because it's almost never trying to pander. There are a few bits now and then from throughout the season that I wish weren't there or that I think don't need to be there, bits that feel more like lore mending or overly conspicuous Easter eggs than necessary and meaningful elements of this story. But the show gets away with those bits because they are far and away the exceptions. The vast majority of what is in Prodigy, even the stuff that is specifically tied to other shows in the franchise, feels necessary and beneficial to this story and feels like it belongs to this show. That's why it works here when it might not work somewhere else. This feels like a story, not a game of lore bingo. You know, I've realized something as I've been talking about all of this. I'm only answering part of the question. How can this cartoon show made for children be so much better than most of the live-action Star Trek that's been produced in this current era of the franchise? That's the question. Because it treats its target audience of children like adults rather than treating its target audience of adults like children. That's the answer, which I have been elaborating on. But that answer, it's more the what than the how, isn't it? Treating the audience like adults, treating the audience with respect, treating the material itself with respect. That's what Prodigy does. But how is it that the creators of Prodigy can do this, but the creators of, in my opinion, Picard and Lower Decks, and sometimes Discovery, though when Discovery didn't work, it was usually for other reasons, but how is it that the creators of those shows can't or couldn't do what Prodigy does? Is it because the writers of Prodigy are just better? I don't think so. The writers of Prodigy have shown themselves to be smart and skilled and generally fantastic at their jobs, but there have been terrific writers on Picard and Lower Decks as well. It's too easy, too reductive to just dismiss a show that doesn't work by saying, the people who made it suck. Sometimes that's the case, no question, but with the current crop of Star Trek shows, I don't think that's it. Those shows have good writers, and there is good writing that shines through even when an episode or a season isn't working overall. I think the shortcomings are more the result of writers being too close to the material, acting too much like fans and too little like storytellers, and probably sometimes having to make and attempt to sell creative decisions forced on them by studio executives who know and care nothing about story and just want to attract the biggest audience possible, as if they had any idea how to do that. But if those things are true, and honestly, that's just speculation on my part, but I'd be surprised if I was that far off, what makes Prodigy different? I think the fact that it is a show aimed at a younger audience might be a big factor. My first impulse is to treat the fact that Prodigy is a kids' show as a hindrance to the creators, but upon reflection, I'm thinking it could actually be an advantage. One of the reasons why still active legacy franchises like Star Trek center so much of the new stuff on the old stuff is that the people in charge of those franchises believe that to be a reliable strategy for retaining the existing audience, for keeping the fandom happy. The media landscape today is more compartmentalized than it's ever been. A top-rated TV series today draws a much smaller audience than a top-rated TV series did 20 years ago. There are more options. The potential audience for just about anything is massive, but the audience that a given project can realistically expect to attract seems to get smaller and smaller every day. As a result, producers of projects and franchises that have a reliable pre-existing audience, like Star Trek, are extremely reluctant to do anything that might turn off that audience, because attracting a new audience is so difficult. So the producers give the people what they know the people like. You like TNG? Here's Patrick Stewart playing Captain Picard again. The most active and engaged fans online appear to be the ones who are deeply invested in the minutiae of the canon and the lore that's accumulated from the various shows and films over the years. So here's Lower Decks, a show that speaks directly to that segment of the fandom and validates their obsession with Star Trek trivia. Star Trek Discovery tried to do something new, did a lot of new things actually, but they didn't want to risk running off the old fans with all that new stuff. So what did they do? Oh, hey, our lead protagonist? Guess what? She's Spock's sister. And look who shows up in person in season 2, Spock! And Captain Pike. Speaking of Captain Pike and Spock, even my favorite of the new shows, Strange New Worlds, does this. Remember classic Trek? Here's a show that directly evokes Star Trek, the original series. The characters, the tone, the episodic format. It is a very intentional throwback to the kind of Star Trek show fans my age and older remember from previous eras of the franchise, with a slicker, more modern, more cinematic style and production design. These are all variations of the same basic strategy, playing to the base. Prodigy does this too, the presence of Janeway and Chakotay and the other legacy characters who pop up throughout the show's, to date, 2 seasons, are obviously attempts to draw the interest of people who already like Star Trek, but Prodigy is also trying to reach a new audience, a viewing demographic that Star Trek has never specifically tried to reach before. Kids. Here in the US, Prodigy is rated TV7, meaning it's appropriate for viewers aged 7 and up. That doesn't mean that only kids can watch it and enjoy it. Lots of adults have been watching and enjoying Prodigy, including me, obviously, but it is conceived as and considered to be, first and foremost, children's programming. And here's the thing, if you're writing a Star Trek show for a target audience of 7-year-olds, you can't assume they've all seen a bunch of Star Trek before. You can't just dump out a pile of legacy characters and TNG and Voyager references and expect them to be impressed. Most of them won't get it. If you're writing a Star Trek show for 7-year-olds and you want to have, say, Wesley Crusher show up, you need to incorporate him into your story in a way that makes sense in your story, even if the viewer has never seen Wesley before. If you want to make reference to off-screen characters or to events that were depicted in previous Star Trek shows, you need to find a way to make those references comprehensible and meaningful to viewers who have never heard of those people or events before watching your show. In other words, instead of resorting to lazy pandering, you have to tell a story that will be compelling on its own merit for its own sake. Which is what all writers should always be trying to do, but that's often not the case, unfortunately, especially in a long-established franchise like Star Trek. What Prodigy does differently, what its status as Star Trek's first effort at children's programming not only allows but demands that it do differently, is reach for viewers beyond the pre-existing fandom. It doesn't just play to the base. It's trying to expand the audience. That's a good idea commercially speaking, sure, but it's also a good idea creatively speaking, and in this case, it has yielded some of the best Star Trek produced in many, many years, and one of the freshest, smartest, and most unique shows in the history of the franchise. So, to everyone else who is currently producing a Star Trek project, and to anyone who produces a Star Trek project in the future, my advice, which you did not ask for, and have no reason to take from me, some dipshit on YouTube, but nevertheless, my advice to you is this. Don't think of your audience as children who need to be pandered and catered and condescended to. Think of them as people who deserve to have their attention rewarded and their intelligence respected, and strive to give them a show worthy of that attention and intelligence. Or put more simply, study up on Star Trek Prodigy, then go and do likewise. And quit doing this shit, all right? It's an insult, and it demeans everyone involved. See? Look, you feel demeaned, don't you? Yes, you do. So what I've got here is house keys and keys to various things around the house. And then, of course, the fingernail trimmers in case you get a snag while you're out and about. And then this is a medal that was awarded to my grandfather for excellent service as an employee of the railroad.